You're listening to the Catholic Wives with Toxic In-Laws podcast. Today's episode is about when no contact doesn't feel peaceful. Are you a Catholic wife grappling with challenging in-laws? The Catholic Wives with Toxic In-Laws podcast is your sanctuary for navigating the sometimes stormy seas of life with toxic in-laws, while being validated for what you've experienced. Join me, your host, Miriam Susan, a Catholic wife who's weathered 3 decades of in-law drama, as we tackle the tough issues you're dealing with head on. Hi, welcome to today's episode. I am your host, Miriam Susan, and today we're going to be talking about when you go no contact, why it does not feel peaceful. Let's say that you finally did it. You set the boundary that you never in a million years thought you'd have to set with your in-laws. No contact. And maybe other people were telling you that it would bring you peace. Maybe you yourself thought, well, if they're the problem, cutting them out will give me the peace that I've been lacking when we've been in contact. But it doesn't always feel peaceful, does it? So I want to acknowledge this fact. You are not alone in this experience if you have gone no contact and you're still waiting for peace to show up. So today's episode is not going to be about how to do no contact. It's not going to be about, what it takes to get there. But I want to talk about why it feels so hard when you go no contact, even when you and your husband both know without doubt that it was necessary, or in our case, even if there was doubt, because there was a lot of doubt, especially in those first few weeks and months after we went no contact, that my husband really was not sure if we had done the right thing. Now looking back, we're 6 years in, looking back, we can see, yes, 100%, it was the best decision. It was the right decision. It was absolutely necessary for the safety of our family and for our own mental health to go no contact. But there were many months and many times, and even years into the process, where my husband had these thoughts of maybe this was not the right thing. And I think that's normal, especially if you were raised in a family where your job was to make sure that you kept everybody happy. And that's probably the case for many of our husbands, is that they were raised in a family where part of their responsibility was to make sure that mom and dad were always happy, no matter what. And when you go no contact, obviously, that's going to make mom and dad not so happy. And there's a guilt that comes with that is ill-placed because you really don't do anything wrong when you decide that you don't want to have contact with somebody who's hurting you and your family. But that doesn't erase the lack of peace. It doesn't erase these trainings that our husbands have gone through for their entire lives to think that they're supposed to make mom and dad happy. And now mom and dad are not happy, so I have done something wrong. Let's dive in with our scripture reference for today. It is from the book of Philippians, chapter 4, verses 6 and 7. And this is from the New Revised Standard Version Catholic Edition. And it says, "Do not worry about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." Now, I want you to notice that in this scripture verse, it says, peace that surpasses understanding. And I would venture to say that this even includes our own understanding of what peace is. And the peace that we're looking for might not look like the peace that we expected. It might not feel logical. It might not make the turmoil and the chaos that your in-laws brought to your family disappear overnight. But it comes. I want you to have hope that peace can come. It is waiting, but it doesn't always involve the path that we think it might take. So when we go no contact, there is this misnomer or a myth that we will have an immediate sense of peace. Now, you might have an immediate sense of peace when you say it because you and your husband are finally taking that stand. You're finally standing up and say, enough is enough. We refuse to be treated the way you're treating us. We don't want you to contact us. And for a moment, you might feel that peace. But then reality sets in. And so we have to think about the expectation of peace versus reality. And there is a gap. So, like we did, you probably expected that once you went no contact, you'd finally be able to breathe. You thought maybe that it was going to be like flipping a switch. Toxic in-laws out, peace in. And maybe you imagined, quiet, peaceful family dinners without dreading your phone buzzing and buzzing and buzzing because your father-in-law was texting you nonstop. Maybe you were thinking that that would now mean you can celebrate holidays without feeling like you're walking on eggshells. Maybe you're just thinking that finally, you are able to just exist without that knot in your stomach. But here's what actually probably happened. The chaos didn't disappear, it just changes forms. So instead of managing your in-law drama, you're now managing the fallout. And that fallout usually includes guilt. Now, like I said in the intro, it is ill-placed guilt because you have done nothing wrong by telling anybody that you don't like the way you're being treated and you don't want contact. That is not a sin. You're not doing anything wrong. So that is ill-placed guilt. Guilt should come after you've done something wrong by cutting off contact with people who are hurting you and your family. That is not doing anything wrong. You might also be managing the what ifs. What if we could have done it differently? What if I didn't do everything as a Christian to, allow this to not happen? What if I could have, said this? Or what if we had done that? But the what ifs will make you crazy. They will absolutely make you crazy. And then there's the voices in your head that sound very much like your mother-in-law or your father-in-law asking, is this really necessary? Are we really that bad? And it might not be the voices in your head. You might actually get voicemails that say this. You might actually get emails and texts or letters in the mail that actually say this. Were we really that bad? Was the situation really that bad that you have to cut off the entire family? So then, no contact often feels more chaotic at first and not less. Because when you were still in contact with your in-laws, you were probably in survival mode like we were. Your whole system, probably every single day, unless you had a miraculous break from your in-laws somehow, some way, your whole system was focused on managing that next interaction, anticipating the next time that they violated or ignored your boundaries, and bracing for the next subtle or not so subtle jab. And that takes so much energy that you don't have room to actually feel anything. You're just reacting, managing, and surviving. And when we are in that state, when that part of our brain is firing on all cylinders, the other part of our brain that allows us to think clearly, to actually feel what's going on in our bodies, it shuts off. It shuts off. And I just last night watched a podcast interview. It was on The Diary of a CEO, I think is the name of the podcast. And the host was interviewing the author of the book called When Your Body Keeps Score. I think his name is Bessel van der Kolk, Kolk. And I know I'm butchering his name, but he's an expert on trauma. And that's what he was saying, is that when our brains, like they actually have brain scans of people who are in this heightened mode of being in a chaotic, traumatic situation. And you can see that one half of their brain is totally lit up and the other half is totally shut down. And the half that's lit up is, the part that is just in survival mode. And the other part is the part of critical thinking and of being able to feel what is going on. It's crazy, but these things actually physically affect us. But now that you're no contact, now that you've removed this immediate threat, your nervous system is probably like, oh, well, we're safe now? Okay, cool. So here's all the feelings that you've been storing up for the past however many years. And it's kind of like when you're able to hold it together during a crisis, and then you fall apart the moment it's over, which is probably very similar to what happens when you would have a visit with your in-laws. If they don't live in your same town, this is what would happen to me. I could hold it together for the 3, 4, 5 days that we visited with them. Sometimes when my husband was in the military, he would get like a whole week, and we would spend a whole week with his parents. And that was a really long time for me to hold it together while dealing with my in-laws, walking on eggshells, and trying to be a mother to very young children. And during that time, you're just able to hold it together. But then, as soon as the visit was over, you fall apart. The crisis was no contact. So you're able to hold it together during the crisis, but then you fall apart the moment it's over. And the crisis, in this case, was no contact being necessary in the first place. And the falling apart is now. You're probably also dealing with the lovely flying monkeys. And if you've never heard this term, flying monkeys are based on the flying monkey characters in the movie The Wizard of Oz. And the Wicked Witch of the West has these flying monkeys who basically, they do whatever she tells them to do. They are her little minions, and she just commands them to do something. They are basically just an extension of her. And flying monkeys for us ends up being other family members or close family friends who suddenly become very concerned about your behavior. They probably didn't say anything before, but now they are. And they might send text messages. And they'll probably sound a whole lot like what your in-laws have been telling you for years. They may call just to check in and then tear you apart for your decision. And then you have this whispering gossip network with flying monkeys that starts working overtime because your in-laws are not going to keep quiet about this. You probably have, or you probably are staying pretty quiet about this, but they're not. So they're telling everybody, and they're bad-mouthing you to everybody in order to get them on their side so that they can have other people that do their dirty work with them. Sometimes it's for them, but often it is with them. Now, through all of this, if your husband is struggling with this decision to go no contact or questioning it, like most of them do, then that adds a whole nother layer. Now, you're not just dealing with your own feelings, but you're helping him process his. And then maybe wondering if he's secretly thinking that you're overreacting. I know that I was thinking this too. I was thinking my husband might think that we were overreacting by going no contact, and now he's going to want to take it all back. And then the stress of all that, it's a lot. So what is the difference between a right decision and an easy decision? Because we've been sold this lie that good decisions feel good and bad decisions feel bad, but that's not how it works when we have complex, painful situations that require decisions. Now, the right decision can feel absolutely terrible, especially at first, especially when it goes against everything that you were taught about family and forgiveness and keeping the peace. But an easy decision doesn't often cost you much at all. A right decision will sometimes cost you everything except your sanity. So, no contact wasn't easy, but it could have been, and it most likely is, the right decision. Now, if it was easy, you would not be questioning yourself right now. You wouldn't be struggling with this decision. And the fact that it is a hard decision does not mean that it's wrong. It might actually mean that it's right, because you're finally choosing your own family's well-being over keeping toxic people comfortable and not rocking their boat. So I wanted to think about a scripture reference that could help us understand that we're not alone. And the first thought that came to mind was the Holy Family fleeing to Egypt. Another example might be Abraham and Sarah leaving Ur. But I'm going to talk about the Holy Family because I love St. Joseph. And of course, I love the Blessed Mother. But St. Joseph is just so very special to me. But let's think about the Holy Family leaving Egypt, or fleeing to Egypt in the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 2, verses 13 and 14. An angel literally told Joseph, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." Now, this is obviously not a choice, no contact situation here. But I think that there are things that we can learn from this story that can apply to our situation. So, St. Joseph and the Blessed Mother, they were following direct guidance from God. So, what did that obedience look like? Well, it looked like them running for their lives in the middle of the night. It looked like them becoming refugees in a foreign country with no extended family support. They were in a different culture, probably a different language. I assume it was a different language, Egyptian versus Aramaic, and they were completely isolated. And then I want to think, how did the Blessed Mother feel? Did she feel at peace on that journey? There was probably a certain level of fear and anxiety that she felt as they were fleeing for their lives. Now, yes, she had what I would consider supernatural trust in God. And she had a supernatural peace because of that trust. But I wonder, she was still fully human. And I wonder if she was thinking, as they were running for their lives, going to Egypt, which was not a quick trip, if she was thinking, is this the right decision? Especially in those moments when she was exhausted and scared and in a strange land. Now, I don't know. The scriptures don't go into detail about that. But I know that she was a wife and a mother, and she was trusting her husband and following his lead. But that doesn't mean that she didn't perhaps have some anxieties or have some fears about what they were doing and wondering, what does it look like for God to take care of us in all of this? They absolutely did the right thing. They protected their family from a genuine threat. But I can almost guarantee that it didn't feel peaceful to them at every moment. There were probably many moments where it felt like chaos, like things were falling apart, like they had lost everything familiar. And yet, they were exactly where God needed them to be. Safety doesn't always feel safe at first, and protection doesn't always feel peaceful immediately. So sometimes our obedience to God's call to protect our family means leaving everything familiar behind and living in the uncertainty of how long is this going to last? Just like the Blessed Mother and St. Joseph didn't know how long that they would be in Egypt to protect Jesus. Now, the peace came later, after the threat was gone, after they'd had time to rest and probably get somewhat assimilated into Egyptian culture. They had time to heal. After they could just be a family without constantly looking over their shoulders to protect Jesus. When we remove the actual toxic behavior from our lives, what's left is all the feelings that we were too busy managing to actually process. Once we go no contact, we're not running on adrenaline anymore. And now we are feeling everything that we pushed down while we were in crisis mode. Hey, if you've been listening to this podcast thinking, finally, somebody gets it, well, I have got something for you. I just launched a brand new community called Catholic Wives Plus Toxic In-Laws, and it's exactly what it sounds like, a place where you can finally talk honestly about your in-law struggles without being told to just pray more or just let it go. This isn't another course that you have to complete. It's a community of women who will believe your story, who will validate your experience, and help you find peace without compromising your Catholic faith. So if you're tired of carrying this heavy, heavy burden alone, go to toxicinlaws.com and join us. Your peace is waiting inside. So here are some things that most people are not going to tell you about this grief that you experience after going no contact. Now, going no contact is not just about removing toxic people from your lives. It's about grieving the in-laws that you wish you had, or the in-laws that you thought you had, and your husband grieving the parents that he thought he had. My husband used to have his parents on a pedestal. He thought that they were just the pillars of the community. They were just amazing parents, foster parents, volunteers, homeschool parents, the whole 9 yards. And then the scales fell off, and he started to see who they were behind closed doors. It was a grieving process for him to mourn the loss of a relationship with people that he thought he had, but really those people probably never existed. It's also grieving the fantasy of this happy extended family. It's realizing that there are a lot of people in the extended family who have been enabling this kind of behavior for years and never stood up against it. It's also mourning what your kids won't have, even if what they won't have was actually harmful. It's mourning this idea of having this wonderful grandparent-grandchild relationship, but now it's not going to happen. So why does protecting your peace feel like you're doing something wrong? And I think it's because we believe this lie that if it really was the right choice, it wouldn't hurt this much. So we're faced with guilt and second guessing that comes in waves that crash over you, and then they go away and things feel a little bit better. And then here comes another wave of the guilt and the what ifs. But that's just kind of how this process goes. We have to grieve the loss of these fantasies that we had, because that's exactly what they are, is fantasies. If your in-laws are toxic, they're manipulative, if they're controlling, if they gaslight, if they're abusive in any way, spiritual, physical, emotional, psychological, then it was a fantasy that you had in your mind of thinking that things would be different than they actually are. So this turmoil that you are experiencing right now, if you are in especially the early days of no contact, it's because you removed the chaos that your in-laws created, but now you're dealing with the chaos of wondering, am I the problem? Maybe I am the one that caused all this. Maybe if I had never done X, Y, and Z, things wouldn't be like this. And maybe your husband is struggling, and that's even adding more pressure to this idea that maybe you are the problem. And maybe your extended family is guilting you and blaming you. I've been accused of manipulating and basically brainwashing all of our children into believing that my in-laws are who they are, and that supposedly my children know nothing but good times with my in-laws. And if they think otherwise, it's all my fault. And maybe you feel like you are just a bad Catholic and you're ruining everything because family is everything. Maybe the turmoil also includes those flying monkeys that are out in full force. Or maybe one of the hardest parts is that nothing dramatic happened at the end. Maybe you didn't have a giant blow up. Maybe you didn't have one huge catastrophic fight, but it was just finally too much. And I feel like our situation was kind of a combination of both. There wasn't a big, giant blow up. It was just a very subtle comment by my mother-in-law to our daughters. 2 of them were adults, and then my other daughter was 15. And she was standing in our kitchen, and she looked at our girls, and she was trying to get them to go on an international mission trip to Panama. And she just told my girls that they were basically adults, and they didn't need anybody's approval to go. They didn't need permission from mom and dad to go on this trip. And that's not a big blow up. I will acknowledge that. But for my husband, it was a slap in the face. Because for years, even before we had ever married, he had this sick feeling that one day his mom would try to turn his children against him. And there it was, right in our kitchen. And it wasn't a big explosive situation. It was just at that moment, my husband realized it was too much. It was done. That and a combination of seeing how I was physically affected by just being around his mom. That's why we went no contact. Now, it's also the death by 1,000 paper cuts. That's what leads it to be the point of being too much. It's the little things that add up over so many years. But maybe your situation is different. Maybe there was some really gross, egregious things that your in-laws did, and then there was no big final blow-up. But there is a point, and you just thought, this is enough, or this is the straw that broke the camel's back. And it doesn't have to be a big, giant thing to decide to go no contact. And a lot of times with these types of personalities, it's this feeling of trying to hit a moving target. So even though you have gone no contact, you're possibly still trying to figure out if you did enough, if you tried enough, if you sacrificed enough, if you bent over backwards enough, if you gave enough, if you prayed enough, if you were Christian enough, if you were Catholic enough. And my friends, that feeling, it's exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting because chances are you tried everything in your power to make it work before going no contact. You probably tried talking it out. Maybe your husband sat down with his dad and tried to have, a man-to-man talk. Maybe you brought in a pastor. Maybe you brought in a friend. Maybe you brought in a cousin or somebody else to kind of mediate that conversation, and it just went nowhere. Or you felt like it went somewhere, which is often what happened with my husband and his dad, is he felt like it was a good conversation. And then his dad would go home and talk to his mom, and everything good would have been erased. And then it was almost like she removed the hard drive from his brain, rewrote it, and then plugged it back in. And that's what would happen. And that was extremely defeating for my husband to feel like he could sit down with his dad and have him understand, but within 24 to 48 hours, everything had been erased, and now my husband was the bad guy, and his mom was a good mother. It's exhausting. And so with those kinds of situations, you will never hit this point where you feel like you did enough. And that's often where we have to come in as the wives and say, what else could we have done? We tried talking it out. We wrote them letters. We explained everything. We've gone to the priests. Maybe you went to therapy. Whew, I did not ever agree to go to therapy with my in-laws because I knew it would not go well. And I was not about to be in a therapist's office and have my words turned against me. So that is one thing that I will freely admit that we did not do. But if you know anything about people with different personality disorders or those kinds of traits, you have to find a very specialized therapist to see for therapy, because these kinds of personalities, these manipulative and toxic personality types, they can pull the wool over on a therapist, and the next thing you know, you're being just chewed up forwards, backwards, inside out, steamrolled, whatever. And I did not want that to happen. I was not willing to do that. My husband had tried to go and speak with a pastor with his parents, and it just did not go well. And so I thought, well, nope, I'm not going to walk into that situation knowing how it went the first time. The first time, the pastor was ill-trained and told my husband that the grandparent-grandchild relationship is the second most important relationship that exists. And if you have listened to any of my episodes about the proper order of a Catholic family, now this was a Baptist pastor, so he probably was not very well trained in this concept. Well, obviously he was not, because he said that the grandparent-grandchild relationship is the second most important relationship that we can have in life. But obviously he did not understand that. Obviously, if you are a Christian, your first and foremost relationship should be with God. Second most important relationship is with your spouse. The third is with your children, and everybody else comes after. So, no, I was not going to step into a therapist's office with my in-laws. But there was really nothing else that we could do. But there's still that feeling of feeling like maybe we should have done more. And as sure I was of our decision to go no contact, even I had those thoughts of, had we done enough? My husband more so, because they are his parents. But for me, I even questioned, had we done enough? And that's good. I think that is good that we take those moments of self-reflection and think, did we do enough to try to salvage this relationship? But know and keep in mind what happened when you tried to do those things. What happened when you and your husband tried to sit down with your in-laws and have a talk? Did it go well? Did they throw things back into your face? Did you see any progress at all? And if the answer is no, that there was no progress, they did throw things back in your face, then what makes you think that one more conversation would have changed anything? It wouldn't. So peace does not always end up looking like what we thought it would. Peace does not mean that there is an absence of difficult and doubting feelings. We can have peace in the storm versus peace after the storm. Think about that. Jesus would provide peace in the storm, but we don't always have peace after the storm. Think about after a hurricane hits. There's chaos, there's damage, there's rebuilding that needs to happen after a storm. And sometimes that's where we're at. Is the storm is past, and now we have to deal with the fallout. And so what if this turmoil that you're going through is part of the healing process? What if it's part of you examining everything and taking it to the Lord and asking Him to help you deal with all of this. Maybe this chaos that you're still in is just different kind of chaos, but is part of the healing process. And what if this peace that we are seeking, it comes in gradually and not instantly? We've been conditioned to believe that if we feel bad about a decision, that we'd made the wrong decision. But sometimes we feel bad because we're finally feeling instead of just surviving. So if no contact doesn't feel peaceful just yet, you're not doing it wrong. You're not dealing with the stress of managing their toxicity anymore, or maybe you still are. Maybe they're still trying to get in. Maybe they're still sending emails, still sending texts. If they're still sending texts, block them. If they're still leaving voicemails, don't listen to them. If they're still sending emails, create a folder and a filter and put them so they're not the first thing you see when you open up your email account. We've done all of those because just that little point of contact was so triggering. But now that you're not dealing with that stress of managing them face-to-face or on the phone anymore, now it means that you're dealing with the stress of our own healing. And that is progress. It's hard. It's not easy, but it's progress. So what if the turmoil that you're in right now isn't a sign that you made the wrong choice, but a sign that you're finally safe enough to fall apart, to fall into each other's arms and deal with the thoughts and the emotions and the gravity of just how sucky this situation is that you're in right now. You're not alone in all of this. Keep listening to encouraging things. I hope that my podcast is encouraging to you. Otherwise, I don't know why you're listening if it's not encouraging. Keep listening to this podcast. Listen to other ones that validate and help explain what you're going through. Keep processing what you've been through. It takes a lot. It takes a lot of processing to understand what you've been through, whether it's been just a few months or whether it's been decades. It's still a lot to process because these are people who are supposed to love you unconditionally, and you've seen that that is not the case. And for so many of us, that is so foreign to our way of thinking. Like, I cannot fathom doing to any of my children what my in-laws have done to my husband and to me. I can't. I mean, it boggles my mind. And so there's a lot to process. And then you need to give yourself permission to feel all the hard feels without assuming that they mean that you messed up, that you did something wrong. Peace is attainable. It's not easy. It's not easy to get, but it is there. And God is faithful to answer your cries for peace. It takes time. It takes effort. It takes self-reflection. It takes going to confession a lot of times, but it is there. And God, I firmly believe, desires for you to have it. God bless you. Go in peace. Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. If you've ever wondered just how toxic your relationship with your in-laws really is, I've got the perfect tool for you. Introducing the new free Toxic In-Laws Assessment, a self-graded quiz designed to help you identify the true level of toxicity in your relationship with your in-laws. Whether you're unsure if your in-laws are really that bad or you think they might be worse than you realize, this assessment will give you the clarity you need. Don't leave it to guesswork. Take the free Toxic In-Laws Assessment now and start your journey towards healthier and more peaceful family dynamics. Visit desiringpeace.com/quiz to get started. Disclaimer. All content and information on this podcast and our website, including our programs, products, and/or services, is for information and educational purposes only and does not constitute professional medical, psychiatric, or mental health advice of any kind, and does not establish any kind of professional client relationship by your listening to this podcast or use of my website. A professional client relationship with you is only formed after we have expressly entered into a written agreement with you that you have signed, including our fee structure and other terms to work with you in a specific matter. Although we strive to provide accurate general information, the information presented here is not a substitute for any kind of professional advice, and you should not rely solely on this information. Always consult a professional in the area for your particular needs and circumstances prior to making any professional, medical, or mental health related decisions.